Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 197, Loyalty 4. The third Captain Commander of the Inner Fortress of Heaven and Earth Society, Seop Chun, who had witnessed Mok Jae-un's true face filled with pure malice, momentarily lost his words as a chill ran up his spine. It seemed he had been mistaken after all. Seop Chun had felt that Mok Jae-un was similar to Na Yul Riang, the society leader's great disciple. But that wasn't the case. Certainly both of them were definitely different from ordinary people. However, if the eldest young master Na Yul Riang gave off a cold feeling of being emotionless and solely pursuing the path of a villain, Mok Jae-un appeared to be pure evil itself. How could such a person exist? A trembling rose from within him. At that moment, thump, Mong Muyak collapsed. The state of Mong Muyak, who had his eyes rolled back and his body trembling, did not look good. It seemed that on top of having his arm cut off, he had suffered a great shock from nearly having his neck sliced as well. Thanks to that, Seop Chun, who had been gripped by fear for a moment, was able to come to his senses. You went too far. What? I said you went too far. In what way? If it was for loyalty, what I did earlier was more than enough to prove it. But what was the reason for pushing it this far? If we had ended it then as you said like this. I told you pretending is meaningless. Is there any other way for you to prove right here that you weren't going to monitor me on the vice leader's orders or work for other successors? Seop Chun couldn't answer to this. Although he had crossed the line, what Mok Jae-un said was correct. Nor should he say it was wise. Thanks to this, I have no choice but to be in the same boat as this bastard. It was from the moment he attacked the vice leader's son Mong Muyak. From his position without any backing, he had no choice but to follow Mok Jae-un to avoid becoming an enemy of the vice leader. But he couldn't help feeling conflicted. Just a moment ago he wanted to achieve great things together with Mok Jae-un and make his family name and his own name resound not only throughout the Heaven and Earth Society but the entire Central Plains. But now that he had seen the true face of the evil inherent in Mok Jae-un, he was frightened. Was he truly someone he could trust and follow? Wouldn't this be the worst choice? Why are you staring at me like that? To be honest, I'm afraid. Afraid? Yes. Of what? I'm afraid of you, and just now, I had doubts about whether choosing you would be the right decision for me. Very honest of you. Even if I had steeled my resolve, I can't help it after seeing your true self. True self. Mok Jae-un chuckled. Then he approached Seop Chun, lightly tapping his shoulder, and said, I like that. I commend you for facing me head-on and not turning away even after seeing that side of me. It was a truly peculiar compliment. Should he take this as a compliment? But what was it that strangely made him waver at the words of this guy who was younger than him? Was it because of the leadership qualities this guy possessed? Or was it this guy's capacity? Seop Chun opened his mouth. I have a wish. A wish other than being my right-hand man and left-hand man? Yes, I have one. What is it? Fear is fear, but I hope there will be a sense of fulfillment in following you. At those words, the corners of Mok Jae-un's mouth twitched. A sense of fulfillment. From the moment he joined him, he would walk a path stained with blood. So would this person be able to feel a satisfactory sense of fulfillment from that? As he was pondering this, Chong Ryong's voice was heard. No need to think too much. There is no such thing as a master-servant relationship without giving and taking. Rather than making a fuss about a sense of fulfillment, you just need to appropriately fulfill their desires. I see. I'm learning something again. At Mok Jae-un's words, Chong Ryong cleared her throat and said, Ahem. Why are you acting like you're learning something new? Mok Jae-un chuckled and said to Seop Chun, Don't worry too much. If you faithfully perform your role, you will undoubtedly obtain what you desire. I can certainly promise you that. At these words, Seop Chun let out a soft sigh. Hearing such words from Mok Jae-un made him feel much better. He hoped it would really turn out that way. That way this choice wouldn't become the worst. Thud. With the matter settled, Seop Chun knelt on one knee and clasped his hands, shouting to Mok Jae-un, Seop Chun, the third Captain Commander. I pledge my loyalty to young Master Mok Jae-un. Please accept it. Mok Jae-un stared intently at Seop Chun, who was pledging his loyalty. A glint of interest shone in Mok Jae-un's eyes as he looked at him. Siap Chun was a different type of subordinate from those he had brought under his command so far. He had come to him of his own accord. And even after seeing a side close to his true nature, he didn't turn away from it and even showed honesty about that fear. This isn't bad either. It's because you gained a subordinate in a proper way. Is that so? Mok Jae-un chuckled at Chong Ryong's words. Proper way. This was the one thing he didn't particularly agree with Chong Ryong's words. He was simply making the most optimal choice for the situation. I accept. Mok Jae-un said to Siap Chun. Then Siap Chun bowed his head to the ground, paying his respects. Since his loyalty was accepted, he was showing proper etiquette. It was said that the ruler, the master, and the father who gave birth to you are one and the same. So one shows respect with a bow. Having fulfilled the etiquette, Siap Chun stood up and said, Since I have decided to serve you as my lord, I will address you with respect from now on. Please speak comfortably, my lord. I will do so gradually. You don't have to be formal. Feel free to. When the time comes, I will do so. For now, this is more comfortable for me. Siap Chun didn't hide his puzzlement. But what could he do if Mok Jae-un, his lord, said he would do so? He was only following his lord's will. More than that, this seemed to be the priority. Siap Chun checked the condition of the collapsed Mong Muyak, the vice leader's son, and sighed, saying, Phew. The bleeding is severe and his condition is not good. It was as expected. Tap 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 tap. Siap Chun pressed Mong Muyak's acupuncture points to stop the bleeding, hurriedly raised his severed left arm above his heart, and tore a piece of cloth to tightly tie it so that there would be no more bleeding. After taking these measures, Siap Chun clicked his tongue and said, My lord, do you have a plan? A plan. Yes, I don't want to blame what has already happened, but he is the vice leader's son. Moreover, he was selected for this mission, so is it okay to do this? Siap Chun was genuinely concerned. Would Mong Muyak, whose arm was cut off, still be willing to carry out the mission with them? Or would he return like this and report it to the society leader or the vice leader? If that happened, everything would be messed up. However, are you worried? Mok Jae-un showed no such concern. Was he not worried at all even when things might turn into a disaster? To Siap Chun, who was furrowing his brow, Mok Jae-un said, More importantly, search his body to see if there's anything. Excuse me. I said to search him. Understood. At Mok Jae-un's command, Siap Chun was momentarily puzzled but searched the collapsed Mong Muyak's belongings without further question. There was nothing particularly noteworthy other than silver coins and the Heaven and Earth Society's identity tags. However, he found something unexpected hidden in a small pouch inside his leather shoes. Rummage, rummage. Huh. What was this? Inside was a small red bottle. What the hell was this that he had hidden inside his leather shoes? Siap Chun, who was staring at it with questioning eyes, soon brought it to Mok Jae-un. He was hiding this. Is that so? Mok Jae-un, holding the small bottle about the size of 2 fingers, shook it. It was difficult to guess what was inside with just this. So Mok Jae-un gestured to Mong Muyak with his head and said to Siap Chun, Wake him up. Is it okay to wake him up right now? Is there any reason not to? Understood. Siap Chun pressed one of Mong Muyak's acupuncture points and infused internal energy into him. Soon Mong Muyak, who had lost consciousness, opened his eyes. Gasp. Mong Muyak, who had opened his eyes, abruptly sat up and looked at Siap Chun with a perplexed expression while coughing. Cough cough. For a moment, Mong Muyak thought he had been dreaming. But soon he discovered his severed left arm and realized this was reality. Mong Muyak frowned, unable to bear the pain. Siap Chun couldn't hide his inner guilt towards him. He lost his arm because of me. If he had attacked with the intention to kill from the beginning, as Mok Jae-un said, perhaps the incident of his arm being cut off wouldn't have happened. For a martial artist to lose an arm, it meant problems with balance and everything else, signifying a sharp drop in combat power. He fully understood the guy's state of mind. Then Mong Muyak spoke with eyes full of mixed emotions. Have you betrayed us? At his question, Siap Chun hurriedly waved his hands and said, No way. Why would we betray Heaven and Earth Society? Then why? Mong Muyak raised his voice. Filled with anger, he glared at Siap Chun and then shifted his gaze to Mok Jae-un, saying, Why did you do this? He held up his severed arm. He wanted to cut off their arms in the same way, but knowing he was at a disadvantage, he barely suppressed his anger and lowered his voice. To him, Mok Jae-eun said with a smile, "Are you resentful that your arm was cut off?" You. The anger he had barely suppressed flared up again at the mocking tone. Sep-chun warned him, "Calm down. Calm down. If you were in this situation, do you think you could calm down? How could you do this if you're not spies or traitors?" Sep-chun couldn't answer to this. He felt too sorry to tell him that he had attacked to prove his loyalty. But Mok Jae-eun didn't seem to have such feelings at all. With a still smiling face, he approached Mong Muyak. Then he held out the red bottle and said, "More importantly, what is this?" Mong Muyak, who had been unable to control his anger just a moment ago, quickly calmed down. How did that? That was what his father, vice leader Mong Seocheon, had given him. If that bastard contacts the righteous faction or shows suspicious signs, use this. You know how to use it, right? Mong Muyak instinctively crossed his ankles and checked if the bottle hidden inside his leather shoes was there. But it wasn't. Damn it. They must have searched his belongings. The person his father, the vice leader Mong Seocheon, had told him to use this on was none other than Mok Jae-eun. Seeing Mok Jae-eun holding that, he was extremely perplexed. Unable to say anything, Mok Jae-eun asked him again, "It's your own item, so you won't say you don't know, right? Why aren't you answering? Do you not know what this is?" At the repeated questions, Mong Muyak finally made an excuse. "It's something necessary for this mission." Mission? Yes. Come to think of it, he hadn't used it yet, and if he made an appropriate excuse that it was for a secret mission, it would be a solvable problem. What could he do to him with this? But then Mok Jae-eun chuckled and said, "Something necessary for the mission? Yes, it's nothing special." "Ah, I see. When the mission starts, you'll find out." "Since it has practically already started, it wouldn't matter if we found out now, would it?" Mong Muyak calmly responded to Mok Jae-eun's persistent questioning. "The advance team said they would inform me of the exact purpose, so I truly don't know either." The advance team? Yes. If he made this excuse, they wouldn't be able to question him further. However, is that so? Mok Jae-eun, who had been nodding his head, opened the lid of the red bottle he was holding. "Pop. What are you doing? Close it right now." Mong Muyak shouted at Mok Jae-eun in a moment of panic. To this, Mok Jae-eun tilted his head and said, "Why are you so startled? Close it quickly. I said close it. This is strange. Why are you making such a fuss about closing it as soon as I open it when you claim you don't know what it is?" "That's... Do you really not know?" I was just told it's dangerous. That's why, so please close it." Mong Muyak pleaded, almost begging. But Mok Jae-eun instead held the bottle closer to him. Then Mong Muyak frantically struggled, trying to distance himself. "You really... hold him." At Mok Jae-eun's command, Sep-chun pressed down on Mong Muyak's shoulders. "I'll let go." Seeing him react with such disgust as if he were having a seizure, Mok Jae-eun became genuinely curious about what was inside this bottle. So he brought the bottle closer and said playfully, "Even if it's dangerous, it wouldn't hurt to use a little, right? Since you won't be able to carry out the mission with that body anyway for our sake." It's the explosive shattering worm." "Pardon? What's inside is the explosive shattering worm. It's very small and can enter through the mouth or nostrils, so please close it. I'm begging you." In the end, Mong Muyak revealed the truth. At this, Mok Jae-eun chuckled and closed the lid of the bottle. "You said you didn't know, but you did? Don't tremble so much. I had blocked the opening with internal energy." At these words, Mong Muyak gritted his teeth. This bastard was toying with him. But even if he showed his emotions here, there would be nothing beneficial for him. "For the mission, I was told to keep it a secret and know about it alone. I didn't hide it out of ill intent. I'm sure. What exactly is the explosive shattering worm?" Mok Jae-eun had never heard of it either. So Mong Muyak said, "It's a bug that inhabits the remote deserts of the western regions. Since it's called a worm, that's natural. But judging from your reaction, it seems quite dangerous." "Yes. If it enters the body, it burrows into the blood vessels and circulates through the meridians." "It burrows into the blood vessels?" At these words, Sep-chun clicked his tongue. Just listening to it, it sounded like a terrifying and highly dangerous bug. But why did he bring such a dangerous thing, saying it would be used somewhere in the recapture mission? As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-un said, "Just circulating through the meridians would be dangerous enough, but I don't think that's the end of it. There are other problems, right? Cunning bastard." It was difficult to deceive him at all. In the first place, since it was already a situation where he couldn't deceive him, Mong Muyak revealed the truth. This bug is very vulnerable to sunlight. Sunlight. Yes. That's why in the western regions it's also called the desert night crawler. Desert night crawler? It takes only 1 or 2 hours to lay eggs and become an adult. However, this bug is so vulnerable to sunlight that it explodes and dies if it's exposed to even a little light. That means... Yes. If infected with the explosive shattering worm, the moment you're exposed to sunlight, the meridians throughout your body will burst and you'll die. Ha! At Mong Muyak's words, Sip Chun shook his head. In a way, this seemed more dangerous than even the deadliest poison. With poison, there was at least a possibility for a high-level martial artist to perform qi circulation and detoxify it on their own. But would it be possible to catch and remove one by one the tiny bugs that enter the body and flow through the meridians? Might be impossible. It's impressive that they found such a bug. I don't know how they found it either. I heard that because it's vulnerable to light, it parasitizes moles, earthworms, and insects deep underground in the desert, making it difficult to discover. But here it is. Mok Jae-un shook the bottle wildly. Then Mong Muyak said anxiously, "Be careful. No matter how sturdy the bottle is, if it accidentally breaks, it will be a real disaster." "I'm sure. But why did our vice leader's son bring such a dangerous thing?" At Mok Jae-un's words, Mong Muyak sighed and replied, "Didn't I say? I brought it for the mission." "The mission? I see." With those words, Mok Jae-un whispered in Mong Muyak's ear. "But that mission is to use it if Mok Jae-un, the hostage bastard from the righteous faction, contacts other righteous faction members or shows suspicious signs in the Imperial Palace, right?" Instantly, Mong Muyak's face turned pale and stiffened. How the hell did this bastard know about this? Chapter 198, Loyalty 5. Mong Muyak's face stiffened. How did this bastard know about the secret order his father, vice leader Mong Xiaoqian, had given him before departing on the confidential mission? When high-level martial artists have a private conversation, they use internal energy to control the sound from spreading in all directions. So unless one reads lips up close, it's difficult to discern what was said. Father had his back turned and was at a distance. But how does he know without a single word out of place? It was so absurd that he was utterly perplexed. To the speechless Mong Muyak, Mok Jae-un whispered with a smile. "You see, such a secret order doesn't really need justification and just depends on the will of the person carrying it out, don't you think? What are you? The suspicious signs would ultimately just be a hunch, so it's interesting that such an order was given." "No, that's not it. This is truly just in case." Just in case. What a nice phrase. But I'm not generous enough to let someone who targets my life based on their arbitrary judgment off the hook. At these words, Mong Muyak felt like his heart would explode. Although he had an arrogant and haughty personality, it didn't mean he was bold in everything. Is he trying to kill me? If it were others, he would have tried to escape the situation even if it meant selling out his father. But strangely, those words didn't come out. That's because if the bastard had cared about such things from the beginning, he wouldn't have been able to cut off his left arm. This bastard will definitely do it. Convinced that Mok Jae-un would kill him, Mong Muyak finally surrendered. "No, really. Even if I received the order, it was truly just in case. I never intended to frame you. I wonder. I mean it." Mok Jae-un stroked his chin as if pondering. Then Mong Muyak became even more restless and pleaded with Mok Jae-un. "Believe me. I swear on my family's honor that I had no such intention. You stake your honor too easily." Flinch. Sharp chi was felt from Mok Jae-un's hand. Damn it. Seeing Mok Jae-un show no openings, Mong Muyak became anxious. It felt like Mok Jae-un would slice his throat at any moment. Then Sip Chun's voice reached his ears. "If you truly had no such intention, pledge your loyalty to the Lord." What? What did he just hear? Pledge loyalty? What the hell are you? Lord? Did you just say Lord? Mong Muyak's eyes widened. Come to think of it, although they usually acted like rivals, he knew Seop Chun well. As the third captain commander of the main sect, Seop Chun's position was different from other executives or any other society members, so he couldn't openly support anyone. He was in a position to directly guard the current society leader. But Lord? Yes. I said Lord. I have decided to serve young Master Mok Jung-un as my lord. Huh. Mong Muyak was truly dumbfounded. They hadn't even succeeded in the secret mission yet, so he hadn't become the fourth disciple. But the main sect's guard captain, who shouldn't support anyone due to his position, decided to serve this bastard as his lord? For what reason? He couldn't comprehend it at all. Sure. At that moment, Seop Chun clasped his hands together and apologized to Mok Jung-un. Forgive me, my lord. It's not my place to intervene, but since he is the vice leader's son, it would be better to make him an ally rather than an enemy. With these words, Seop Chun glanced at Mong Muyak. This is the best consideration I can give you. He had lost his left arm because of him, and now his life was in danger due to that bastard's secret order. The only way for him to live was to pledge loyalty to Mok Jung-un. Although they had acted like rivals, he hoped he would make a wise choice. No, please do it. If he died now, inevitably all the arrows of suspicion would naturally point to them. Then the vice leader would become an enemy. At that moment, Mok Jung-un said, "That's unnecessary." Pardon? No matter what, he is the vice leader's son. Would the vice leader's son yield to the power of others and be forced to pledge loyalty to someone else? No way. He has pride, so he would rather commit suicide for his father than do such a thing even if he dies. Right. Mong Muyak couldn't answer to Mok Jung-un's words. If he agreed here, he would have no choice but to choose death. Certainly, it was right to preserve his pride, but death was the end of life. It was too frightening for everything to end. No answer? You're trying to preserve your pride after all? You're befitting of the vice leader's son. Rather than wasting time, it's better to cleanly kill him here. Wait. Loyalty. I will pledge loyalty. Pardon? I didn't hear you well. What did you say? I will pledge my loyalty. Thud. Mong Muyak hurriedly pressed his head to the ground. Although his pride was hurt, surviving was the priority for now. Come to think of it, he could pretend to pledge loyalty and then return to the Heaven and Earth Society to wait for an opportunity. Anyway, with his left arm severed, he could no longer continue the mission. Yes. Humiliation is only for a moment. The moment he escapes from here and reports to his father, this bastard is finished. Mong Muyak was determined to endure this moment. Then Mok Jung-un lifted his head. Sure. Mok Jung-un was licking his lips. The moment he saw that face, his heart raced like crazy as a chill ran up his spine. What the hell was this guy? It was as if he was disappointed that he couldn't kill him. To him, Mok Jung-un said, "I suppose life is better than pride." No answer. That's right. You are correct. But you know what? What is it? It might be better to die. Pardon? Mok Jung-un grinned. That smile was so full of malice that Mong Muyak felt nauseous and like he would vomit. He was holding it back, but it was the first time he was so afraid of someone. He couldn't believe this bastard was from the righteous faction. I need to escape quickly. He wanted to return to the Heaven and Earth Society. Then Mok Jung-un said, "Well, anyway, since you say you'll become my person, I should reward you for that." At those words, Mong Muyak waved his hands. Oh no. How could I expect a reward? He just wanted to be sent back home. That way he could inform his father and the society leader about the true colors of this crazy, evil bastard. But, sure. When Mok Jung-un extended his hand, something flew into his grasp. Smack. It was none other than Mong Muyak's severed left arm. Ugh. It was truly bizarre. He was fine when he saw other people's corpses, but seeing his own severed arm made it difficult to hold back his retching. He really has terrible taste. Seeing this, Seop Chun clicked his tongue inwardly. He would already be suffering from having his arm cut off, so how shocked would he be to receive that as a reward? Since he couldn't continue the mission and could be sent back, he should be treated well, but he didn't understand why Mok Jung-un was doing this. Then Mok Jung-un said, "I'll return your arm." Ugh. Thank you. Mong Muyak forcibly swallowed the rising vomit and tried to receive his severed arm. But Mok Jae-un shook his head. That's not what I meant. Pardon? Then what? Extend your left arm. Mong Muyak made an expression of incomprehension at Mok Jae-un's request. Why was he telling him to extend his left arm? Was he toying with him now? Then Mok Jae-un let out a soft sigh and pulled Mong Muyak's severed left arm. Grip. Ugh. What is this? I said I'll return your arm. Return it, what do you? The blood vessels and nerves need to be reconnected, so I'm asking for your understanding in advance. Quiche. Spurt. At that moment, a sharp chi brushed past, and blood flowed from the left arm where the bleeding had stopped. The pain was less than when it was first cut off, but it was unavoidable, so Mong Muyak's face contorted. Then Mok Jae-un placed the severed arm against the cut surface of Mong Muyak's bleeding left arm. Both Mong Muyak, the person involved, and Seop Chun were dumbfounded. Did he really think the severed arm would reconnect just by attaching it like this? If that was the case, he was truly insane. Seop Chun. Yes. Hold it so it doesn't fall off. What the hell was he trying to do? Seop Chun looked at him with an expression that was hard to understand. To him, Mok Jae-un urged in a small voice. Don't make me say it twice. Why yes. Seop Chun, who had grasped Mok Jae-un's personality, hurriedly carried out the order. He didn't know why he was doing this nonsense, but he held the severed arms as ordered so they wouldn't fall off. Then Mok Jae-un made a sword finger with his right hand and placed it on one part of the severed area. And with his left hand, clap, 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 clap. I'm a rival. 2 fight. John front. J present. Jean array. Guy all. He formed the abbreviated hand seals of the 9-character mantra. As he formed the hand seals, a red heat flowed from the tip of Mok Jae-un's right-hand sword finger. Mong Muyak was startled by the heat. What the hell was he trying to do? Then Mok Jae-un moved the sword finger along the severed area. In that state, the great general of the east, the Azure Emperor, help me. The great general of the center, the Yellow Emperor, help me. The great general of the west, the White Emperor, help me. The great general of the north, the Black Emperor, help me. The great general of the center, the Yellow Emperor, help me. He chanted the incantation inwardly. Sizzle. Along with this, an agonizing pain arose from the severed area where the sword finger passed, as if it were being burned. The pain was more excruciating than when the arm was cut off. Naturally, a scream had to burst out. Airgurk. How noisy. Airgurk. Tisk tisk. Shoo. Mok Jae-un waved his left hand, and Mong Muyak's mouth was shut due to the profound internal energy. Smirking at Mong Muyak, whose eyes were even glistening with tears, Mok Jae-un continued to move the sword finger along the severed area. Sizzle. Wugon gon gak gak woo. Mong Muyak twisted his body, trying to struggle in agony. Of course, Seop Chun was holding his arms and Mok Jae-un was also pressing down on his body, including his mouth with internal energy so he couldn't move an inch. Soon Mok Jae-un's sword finger completely circled the severed area. Sizzle. As he removed the sword finger, the severed area was glowing red. Mok Jae-un smiled upon seeing this. Then Seop Chun asked, "Do I have to keep holding it?" "No, you can let go. If I let go it will fall off." He didn't know what he did, but it seemed like he had cauterized the wound with something like burning internal energy. But how could a severed arm reconnect with just that? It would surely fall off. Seop Chun was inwardly puzzled but let go of his hands as ordered for now. However, what? Surprisingly, Mong Muyak's severed arm, which he thought would fall off, didn't. What the hell did he do? There was no way it could stick like that just by cauterizing the flesh with burning internal energy. My lord, what did you do? This. As soon as he finished speaking, Mok Jae-un lightly slapped the back of Mong Muyak's connected severed hand. Slap. Flinch. Why was he doing that? As he was puzzled, an even more surprising thing happened. This is... what? Mong Muyak, who had been in so much pain that he even shed tears, couldn't hide his astonishment as he looked at his left arm. Twitch. The fingers below the severed area were trembling and moving slightly. Seop Chun, who was watching this, also widened his eyes. No way. He thought it was a pointless prank, but the severed arm really seemed to have reconnected. Seeing this, Mok Jae-un twitched the corners of his mouth. It succeeded. This was a sorcery technique called the Three Wonders Method. It was a technique from a secret book hidden by Cho Tae-chong, the Three-Eyed, a master of healing arts. It was a miraculous technique that could even reconnect a severed arm if a few tricky conditions were met. For example, there were several conditions such as the severed body part must not exceed 1 hour. The biggest constraint among them was that the recipient's original energy would be consumed. Naturally, the stronger the technique, the greater the conditions and constraints, but it didn't matter since it wasn't consuming his own original energy. Besides, there was no need to downplay it when the person involved was so moved. Mok Jae-un said to Mong Muyak, "It will take some time for the severed blood vessels and nerves to fully reconnect, so be careful and splint it for about 5 days." At these words, Mong Muyak looked at Mok Jae-un with trembling eyes. What the hell was this bastard's true identity? How was this possible without being Hua Tuo or Bien Ke? While he was moved, he also felt somewhat terrified of this bizarre ability. To him, who was so speechless that he couldn't easily part his lips, Mok Jae-un said with the corners of his mouth raised, "Now there won't be any significant issues in continuing the mission." Instantly Mong Muyak's expression stiffened. Chapter 199, Water Demon 1. Now there won't be any significant issues in continuing the mission. Oh no. Instantly Mong Muyak's expression stiffened. He had been inwardly moved that the sensation in his severed arm had returned. But there was something he had forgotten. Now he had no choice but to go on the secret mission with Mok Jae-un. Damn it. He should have used his injury as an excuse to immediately return to the Heaven and Earth Society and report this guy's dangerousness to his father, the vice leader, but that plan was completely ruined. To the perplexed Mong Muyak, Mok Jae-un said as if he had forgotten, "And there's one more gift for you." Gift. In the midst of his troubled state, when Mok Jae-un said he would give him something, Mong Muyak looked at him with a face full of suspicion. Then Mok Jae-un took something out from his bosom. It was a bracelet made of chains. Was he really giving him a gift? To the puzzled Mong Muyak, Mok Jae-un said with a sardonic smile, "It's nothing special, but I'd like you to wear this." Swoosh. On a late afternoon with heavy rainfall, a soldier with a protruding mustache was leading the way through a dense forest, guiding someone. That someone was wearing a bamboo hat along with a bamboo raincoat, and in one hand he was holding a black sword that looked charred. Glancing at this unidentified man, the soldier clicked his tongue. For over an hour he showed no signs of fatigue while trudging through the muddy mountain path in the downpour. Martial artists are different. On the other hand, even though he was a native of this place, he was out of breath and panting from exhaustion. The weather was chilly and his breath was visible. Traversing the mountains in this weather was no different from an act of insanity, but money was the culprit. So many silver coins. The silver coins in the pouch the man had shown were too numerous to count. A soldier's salary was barely enough to make ends meet, so his eyes couldn't help but waver. Simply put, it was too much money to refuse. Moreover, there's nothing wrong with receiving this much money just for guiding someone to a place. After walking for about an hour deeper into the forest, the soldier saw red cloth pieces tied to several trees and said, "We're here, sir." The soldier pointed to a plot of land between the trees with red cloth pieces tied to them, where not a single blade of grass grew. It was a truly bizarre place. The color of the soil had a dark reddish hue and the surroundings were eerie. Although the sun hadn't set yet, it was the first time he had come when it was this dark with such heavy rainfall. Perhaps that's why he felt an inexplicable chill running down his spine. Then the man spoke. "Dig the ground." "Pardon? You want me to dig the ground?" "That's right. Oh, I only agreed to guide you to the place where the dead prisoners are buried. I'll pay you more." At the man's words, the soldier looked at the ground that had turned into mud from the rainwater. It was harder to dig wet soil than dry soil. Moreover, he felt somewhat queasy about digging up the ground where corpses were buried all by himself. However, to hell with it. It was difficult to resist the temptation of the silver coins. So for about an hour the soldier dug the ground. Since it was a place designated by the government office to bury the corpses of prisoners, there were tools like pickaxes nearby, so he didn't have to do it with his bare hands. Son of a bitch. This was really too much. Although he was doing this for the silver coins, since he was doing it alone, it would take quite some time, so the soldier thought the man would at least help a little. But all he did was cross his arms and watch. In the end he did it all by himself. Thud. Ah. The soldier who had struck down with the pickaxe swallowed his dry saliva. This feeling just now wasn't soil. Soon several corpses were revealed. Ugh. He felt like vomiting. The stench of rotting corpses was even more pungent because of the rain. But how can he identify anything with the corpses so decomposed? Then the bamboo hat-wearing man, who had been watching with his arms crossed, approached and examined the decomposing corpses. If they were in coffins, the decay would have been less severe, but since they were prisoners, they were simply buried in the soil, reaching a state where it was difficult to discern their condition. Nevertheless, the man continued to examine the corpses. Then he stopped at one corpse. Unlike the other corpses, it was the only one with just a head. As expected, the face was rotten beyond recognition. The bamboo hat-wearing man looked at it and asked, "Why is there only a head for this corpse?" Ah. The soldier hesitated on what to do upon seeing the corpse. That was a corpse that was silenced by the magistrate's orders. What he was asked to do was guide them to this place and dig up the soil anyway, so he had no obligation to reveal the secret that had to be kept. "I'm sorry, but I don't know either." "You don't know?" "It hasn't been years, but only a month and a few days since it happened. To say you don't remember that?" "I really don't know. I'm just a lowly soldier." "Shh." Gasp. Before he could finish his words, the black sword touched his neck. If it pierced just a little, a hole would be made in his neck. Startled, the soldier hurriedly said, What is the meaning of this? Have you ever had a hole pierced through your neck?" The magistrate told me not to speak of it." "I see. But I need to know. So speak. If you threaten a government official like this..." "I don't think it would be a problem if your corpse mixed in with the prisoners' corpses." The killing intent flowing with those words. Eek. Terrified, the soldier finally revealed the truth. "I'll tell you." "Speak." There was a vicious prisoner called Sickle-Slaying Demon among the death row inmates. At those words, the corners of the bamboo hat-wearing man's mouth slightly rose. He had finally found it. The traces of that bastard. He seemed to have wasted quite some time looking for a soldier with no relatives and willing to take money. The bamboo hat-wearing man said to the soldier. But the day before his execution, an incident occurred in the prison. Incident? Yes. What kind of incident? Whether it was done by someone who held a grudge against Sickle-Slaying Demon, he was found dead with his head cut off during the night. Found dead? Yes, but then his body disappeared without a trace, leaving only his head. At those words, the bamboo hat-wearing man's eyes narrowed. Someone suddenly entered the government's prison and killed a death row inmate. But the inmate's body, except for his head, had disappeared? This wasn't something that could be overlooked. But why did the government office just let this slide? Well, he was going to be executed anyway, and if this gets out... Ah. The bamboo hat-wearing man waved his hand. There was no need to hear more. It would have put the magistrate in charge in a difficult position. So they must have kept the fact that someone had infiltrated the prison and committed such an act a secret. Anyway, such information was of no significance to him. What mattered was, they didn't take the head but took the body. That means, there was indeed sufficient room for suspicion. Now if he investigated the Yun Mok Sword Manor, an answer to this suspicion would emerge. Then the soldier, who had been terrified, cautiously said, "Why, you can just give me the silver coins you originally promised, so please." "Ah. You mean the payment?" "Yes. Right, I should give it to you." "Ah." The soldier's face brightened. He had been worried that the man might just take the money and leave, so it was a relief. However, stab. Ack. The black sword pierced the soldier's neck. With a final scream as the sword was pulled out, the staggering soldier collapsed into the pit he had dug, with an expression full of agony. Splash. The pit was filled with muddy water from the collected rainwater, which quickly turned red. "I'll at least give you enough for the underworld toll." Ting. The bamboo hat-wearing man flicked a silver coin into the pit. Then he promptly left the place. Swoosh. The downpour was so heavy that it was difficult to see. It was literally a torrential rain. Piercing through this downpour, 3 men were moving northward. They were Mok Jyeongun, Sip Chun, the third captain commander of the Heaven and Earth Society's main sect, and Mong Muyak, the son of the vice leader. The downpour that had started the day before yesterday had already continued for 3 days. Even for masters of the martial arts world, traveling in this heavy rain wasn't easy. Mong Muyak, who was using light body skills at the very rear, glanced at his splinted left arm. Gradually the sensation was returning and his fingers could move properly. Phew. But now this wasn't particularly joyful. In a way it was like being given a disease and then the cure, and as his severed arm healed he had no choice but to continue the mission. Damn it. It might have been better if his arm had remained severed. Then he could have returned and reported all of this to his father, the vice leader. This bastard was more terrifying than any person he had ever seen. Not only did he have an inhuman side, but he had also mastered all sorts of miraculous skills beyond martial arts, making him even more frightening. A prime example was this chain bracelet he was wearing on his right wrist. Since you've already pledged loyalty, I'd like you to wear this chain on your arm and swear an oath to me. At that time, although it felt somewhat ominous, he thought there wouldn't be any problem with wearing a bracelet, so he followed those words for now. But after making that oath, he realized that he could no longer refuse anything Mok Jae-un said. At one point he thought about attempting to escape, but the moment he had such thoughts, the chain dug into his flesh, nearly making him lose his right arm. As a result, Mong Muyak could no longer harbor any ill intentions. Now he was no different from this bastard slave. Damn it. All that came out was cursing. As he was grumbling inwardly and lamenting his situation, the leading Mok Jae-un and Seop Chun, who had been advancing through the heavy rain, suddenly stopped in their tracks. Wondering why, he looked ahead and, a sigh mixed with perplexity flowed out of Mong Muyak's mouth. That was because a river overflowing from the heavy rain appeared before them. Swoosh. Gush. Seop Chun spoke in a troubled tone. It will be difficult to cross the river. Looking at the river's currents, it wasn't at a level where one could swim across even if they had mastered martial arts. In the first place, it wasn't a distance that could be covered by swimming. The river's scale wasn't as vast as the Yangtze River, so if the river hadn't overflowed due to the heavy rain, they could have borrowed a boat or raft to cross the distance. But now they could be swept away by the currents and risk an accident. I was worried because of the heavy rain, but it seems difficult to cross the river right away. I agree. Mok Jae-un nodded his head, seemingly agreeing with Seop Chun's words. In the face of the laws of nature, even a master of the martial arts world was merely human. For now, my lord, I think we should rest in that nearby village and wait for the rain to stop. At Seop Chun's words, Mong Muyak interjected. Hey, have you already forgotten? The most important thing in this mission is to make it to the rendezvous point on time. If we're delayed by even a day, it becomes difficult to meet the deadline. At these words, Seop Chun sighed and said, That may be true, but how do you propose we cross the overflowing river? Floods and overflowing rivers were natural disasters, not man-made ones. In the first place, it wasn't a problem that could be solved by human power. However, we need to find a way to cross. Mong Muyak's stubbornness was evident. That was because the given deadline to reach Anak, Hunan province, was 10 days. Ordinary people could never make it in 10 days, but for them who were masters above the transcendent realm, it was a distance that could barely be covered if they diligently used light body skills with minimal rest. So by what means? That's sure. Mong Muyak then looked at the nearby village not far from the riverbank. The main occupation of those living in a village situated by the river was usually related to the river. Staring intently at that place, Mok Jae-un said, I can see boats moored near the village entrance. And that boat over there? A large boat was moored by the overflowing riverbank. That wasn't the size of an ordinary boat. It looks quite big. With a boat of that size, couldn't we cross the river? It might be possible. Mong Muyak nodded his head in agreement. The currents were so strong due to the heavy rain that it seemed impossible to cross with small boats or rafts. But with a boat of that size, it seemed possible to cross by drifting downstream with the currents. However, there was another problem here. Seop Chun raised this issue. But my lord, with a boat of that size, it seems impossible to control without boatmen and workers. If it were an ordinary raft, although not as skilled as boatmen, they could row and cross. But that boat seemed difficult for them to control with their own strength. In the end, they needed the help of the boatman who owned that boat. I don't know if the boat owner will launch the boat in this weather. He must have that boat to make a living anyway, so if we pay him enough, he'll launch it. Well, Sip Chun answered indifferently to Mong Muyak's words. They had brought enough travel expenses and had sufficient money to pay for the boat fare. But the rain was too heavy, the river was overflowing, and the currents were so fast that the boat could capsize and wreck if they were unlucky. Even if the money is good, would they readily take a gamble where their life is at stake? To Sip Chun's question, Mok Jong-un smiled and said, "They will." What? Why was the Lord so confident? He was puzzled. It would be better than having their throats slit and dying for refusing. Mok Jong-un was already planning to launch the boat with the premise of threats. Chapter 200 Water Demon. Swoosh. The downpour was still incredibly heavy. The name of this village near the river was Sohashan, small river village. Although it was called a village as befitting a place with a ferry dock, it was a village of considerable size in the area, with about 150 boatmen and fishermen living together. The village itself was adjacent to the river as it operated the ferry dock. If the river rises any more, a few houses will be swept away. On the way to the village, Sip Chun clicked his tongue and spoke. As he said, although they had piled up an embankment with soil to block it, looking at the churning waters, it wouldn't be surprising if it collapsed at any moment. Unlike Sip Chun, who was worried about this, Mok Jong-un and Mong Muyak had no interest at all. Mong Muyak's mind was occupied with nothing but finding the owner of the large boat, and Mok Jong-un had no interest in the affairs of others if they were unrelated to him. However, there was one thing that caught Mok Jong-un's eye. It was an old man with white hair sitting on one side of the embankment that looked unstable, wearing a bamboo raincoat. He had looked there due to a strange sense of incongruity and was puzzled. The waters were so rough due to the heavy rain that the embankment looked like it would collapse at any moment. But what was that old man doing? Upon closer inspection, a curved bamboo stick was visible in front of the old man. Seeing this, Mok Jong-un tilted his head. Fishing. Was he really fishing in this heavy rain? It was utterly incomprehensible. Mok Jong-un, who had been puzzled, soon lost interest and tried to head towards the village. But Mok Jong-un, who was about to leave, hesitated. What is it? For a moment he had tried to pass by without much thought, but something was off. He was more sensitive to qi than anyone else. But just now he hadn't felt any qi from that old man. As if he had blended in with the surrounding objects. Shoo. Mok Jong-un turned his head and looked towards the embankment again. However, the old man who had been there until just now had suddenly disappeared. He looked around just in case, but as if he had never existed in the first place, there was no sign of the old man. The perplexed Mok Jong-un asked through voice transmission, "Chong Ryong, did you see that old man just now?" "Old man? What old man are you talking about?" "The old man sitting on the embankment and fishing or something." "An old man fishing? In this weather, what fishing is he doing?" "Did you see something?" "Oh, I guess I was mistaken." Even Chong Ryong, whose vision was open, didn't see him. Was it really an illusion? "Pai Lord." Sip Chun, who had been standing still, called out to Mok Jong-un in puzzlement. "What's the matter?" "It's nothing." With those words, he shrugged his shoulders and quickened his pace again. The three of them passed the village monument inscribed with Sohashan and entered the village. Swoosh. Due to the heavy rain and the dark evening, there was no one on the streets. Mong Muyak looked around and said, "Someone who owns such a large boat must be a wealthy family or clan leader in this village." "You're stating the obvious." Sip Chun sneered at those words. Then Mong Muyak glared at him, revealing his displeasure. To the two people growling at each other, Mok Jong nodded his head towards somewhere and said, "There's an inn over there." Ah. Fortunately, there was an inn not far from the village entrance. Rather than entering any random house and asking, it seemed faster to go to the inn and find out. So the three of them crossed the raindrops and entered the inn. As they entered the inn with their leather shoes soaked with moisture, the interior, which was older and more dilapidated than expected, was revealed. However, unlike the dilapidated interior, there were quite a few guests in the inn. Perhaps it was thanks to the heavy rain that had been going on for days. They seemed to be outsiders who were stuck and staying. Thump thump. As they entered, the gazes of the guests naturally turned to Mok Jung-un and his party for a moment. Even though they were wearing bamboo hats, they were carrying swords and weapons at their waists and backs, so it was a natural reaction. However, it wasn't just the guests who showed this reaction. Seop Chun and Mong Muyak, who had only been thinking about finding the boat owner, also had their eyes drawn to a few of the guests. That's because martial artists. The guests sitting at the table in the innermost part and those at the rightmost table were martial artists who had mastered martial arts. What was truly peculiar here was that the 6 on the right seemed to be wanderers or villains based on their attire and rough appearance. On the other hand, the attire of those sitting in the innermost part was very neat and tidy. Judging by their almost uniform attire, they looked like escort warriors. The person they were escorting was obviously the woman in the center with her face covered by a veil. She was wearing blue silk clothes embroidered with butterfly patterns, and just by looking at that, it could be inferred that she was of a noble status with considerable elegance. "My lord," Seop Chun called out to Mok Jung-un. The reason was because of the beardless old man sitting next to the woman. He was smiling and serving the woman with utmost devotion, but unlike the others, his chi was concealed, making it difficult to gauge his martial arts level. It wasn't just Seop Chun who felt this. Who the hell is that old man? No matter how much he focused his chi sense, he couldn't discern the old man's level. If he who had reached the pinnacle of the transcendent realm couldn't discern it, it meant the old man was a master of an even higher level. Seeing their wariness, Mok Jung-un said with a smile, "Don't mind them. We came here to secure a boat, didn't we?" But Mok Jung-un didn't care about this at all. Anyway, there was no reason to pay attention to them as they had no acquaintance or reason to clash. Understood. At this, Seop Chun went towards the inn's kitchen and called for the innkeeper. Meanwhile, the veiled woman looked at Mok Jung-un with interest and said in a low voice, "In the midst of being trapped in this village, a treasure has walked in on its own." At her words, the beardless old man who had been talking about this and that to please her, slightly furrowed his brow. Then he cautiously said, "Prin. No, young lady." "Yes. Is it because of that handsome young man who just entered?" At this question, the veiled woman slightly nodded her head. Trapped in the village inn for 3 days due to the incessant heavy rain, her attention was drawn to one of the new guests who had entered the inn. That's because his wet hair and face were too beautiful. Such a face was rare to see even in that place. "Duke, the rain will probably continue for a few more days before it stops, so I'd like to receive service from that man with exceptional beauty." "Young lady, I apologize, but those people, they're martial artists, right?" "That's right. I can tell that much just by looking at their weapons." Yes, you have excellent insight. But do you remember what I told you in advance, young lady? That I should avoid getting involved with martial artists?" Yes. That's right. So please. Duke, didn't you say something before you became my escort? You said that even in the martial arts world, there aren't many masters of your caliber. That may be true, but then are you saying you can't even grant this request to alleviate my boredom and frustration? Oh my. The beardless old man couldn't hide his difficulty at the veiled woman's words. From the moment they entered the inn, he had discerned through chi sensing that those guests were not ordinary people. Those men who appeared to be in their late 20s were masters of the transcendent realm. If they have reached such excellent levels at such a young age, they are likely to be the sons of prestigious families or disciples of major sects in the martial arts world. The boy who looked to be 17 or 18 years old, whom the veiled woman had singled out, also hadn't even come of age, but he seemed to possess outstanding talent, appearing to be at the peak of the transformation realm. The old man looked at them with a troubled gaze. What should I do? Even food can cause severe indigestion if eaten incorrectly. This was precisely such a situation. It wouldn't be a problem to mess with those worthless wanderers on the other side, but those of this level were different. If he carelessly provoked them, it could become troublesome, and getting caught up in gossip during a secret mission wasn't a very good direction either. However, if I keep suppressing her, she will definitely explode. The veiled woman had been raised so nobly that she had to have her way to be satisfied. How many incidents had occurred even on the way to Guangzhou? He had barely managed to coax and appease her to come this far. It has piled up to the limit. Her mood was close to the worst, having been trapped in this damp and dilapidated inn for 3 days due to the continuous heavy rain. If he just kept saying no, her anger would eventually be directed at him. Then, it would make things difficult for this old man as well. The veiled woman's anger wasn't a big problem. If it somehow reached that person's ears and was misreported, it could make things difficult in the future. Therefore, although it was somewhat troublesome, some compromise seemed necessary. The old man cautiously said to the veiled woman, "Then how about doing it this way?" With this, the old man told her what he had in mind, and although the veiled woman showed a dissatisfied expression, she eventually nodded her head reluctantly and gave permission. Swoosh. Behind the inn, Mok Jae-eun and his party followed the old woman, who was the owner and innkeeper of the inn, through the kitchen to the back of the inn. After coming out to the back, the old woman looked around and said, "No. What's the rush for you young folks to find that boat?" At the old woman's question, Seop Chun politely said, "Ma'am, we are in a situation where we need to cross the river urgently. I understand what you said earlier, but launching a boat in this weather with such rough waves could lead to big trouble. I'm aware of that, but we have our own circumstances." At Seop Chun's words, the old woman shook her head and clicked her tongue. Then she pointed somewhere with her hand. It was the hillside to the northwest of the village. The downpour was so heavy that he hadn't noticed, but there was a large estate-like structure on that side. As expected, it seemed to be a wealthy family that was doing quite well in the village. However, the owner of that boat lives over there, but there's no use going. Thank you for telling us. I'm telling you it's no use, but are you turning a deaf ear? Pardon? The owner of that boat. In other words, the master of that house has done evil deeds and is now dying from divine punishment. At those words, Seop Chun furrowed his brow. Divine punishment? What does that mean? What do you mean by that? Didn't I say it? The master of that house is dying. Is the master of that house the boatman? That's right. But you said he's dying? Didn't I say so? That fellow has been possessed by a water ghost, and his condition is unspeakable. If you go there for no reason, you might also get cursed, so just wait for the rain to stop. At the old woman's words, Seop Chun made an expression of incomprehension. He thought he might be sick, but what does it mean to be possessed by a water ghost? As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-eun said with a smile, "Let's go and see for now." At his attitude of not caring at all, the old woman shook her head. "I'm telling you this out of concern that you outsiders might get cursed for no reason, but you don't believe me. Well, if you want to die from a curse, suit yourself." With those words, the old woman swiftly entered the inn. Seeing this, Seop Chun muttered in an unpleasant tone, "That old hag has no manners. TSK. Divine punishment and water ghosts, aren't those just ghost stories?" He didn't understand why she was saying such things. Then Mok Jae-eun said, "Anyway, now that we know who the boat owner is, we'll find out if we go." "Well, you're right." So they were about to head straight to the estate where the boat owner was said to be. But after walking only a few steps, someone called out to them, "Excuse me, young masters." Flinch. At that call, Seop Chun and Mong Muyak instantly turned around with eyes filled with wariness. That's because no matter how heavy the downpour was, they should have been able to sense the presence at the distance where the voice was coming from, but they had failed to do so. Their eyes widened as they turned around. Who is this person? The one who had called out to them was none other than the beardless old man who had been in the inn. He was already cautious from the moment he first saw him because he couldn't discern his level through chi sensing, so why did that old man call out to them? As they were puzzled, the old man clasped his hands together and said, "I apologize for calling out to you on your way, but this old man is called Elder Biam." At the old man's words, Mong Muyak said in a voice mixed with wariness, "For what reason did you call us, sir?" Young masters. There's no need to be so wary. This old man didn't call you to harm you." As if he had noticed their wariness, the beardless old man who had introduced himself as Elder Biam, said with a smiling face. At this, Mong Muyak asked again, "Then may I ask for what reason you called us?" "Ho ho. The young master seems to be in quite a hurry." "Alright, I'll get straight to the point. I unintentionally overheard your situation earlier. It seems you were looking for a large boat to cross the river, am I right?" At Elder Biam's words, Mong Muyak furrowed his brow. He said unintentionally, but in the end he had eavesdropped on the conversation between the old woman and them, hadn't he? He was about to feel displeased when Elder Biam said, Actually, this old man also went to find the boat owner at the request of the young lady I'm serving. You mean you went to find the boat owner? That's right. But judging by the fact that we're currently waiting for the rain to stop at the inn, I'm sure you can roughly guess what happened, can't you? At his words, this time Seop Chun asked in puzzlement. You couldn't borrow the boat? That's right. This old man also met the boat owner, but he was already on the verge of death, in no condition to steer the boat. On the verge of death means his life is in danger? At Elder Biam's words, Seop Chun looked at Mong Muyak with an expression of what should we do? If the life of the boatman who could control the boat was in danger, whether it was payment or threats, it was all meaningless. However, thank you for the information. But it doesn't seem like you called us just to tell us that. Mok Jyongun said to Elder Biam. Then Elder Biam replied with a smile. You're right. So, the young lady I'm serving wants to build a rapport with you young masters while waiting for the weather to clear up. If it's alright, could you spare some time? Rapport. That's right. We're both in a situation where we're waiting, so there's not much to do anyway. And the young lady has shown so much interest in you that this old man is making this request. With those words, Elder Biam clasped his hands together once again. He spoke in such a polite manner that Mong Muyak and Seop Chun exchanged troubled glances. In fact, they were in the middle of a secret mission, so it wasn't a situation where they could come into contact with someone else, even if they had to wait for the rain to stop. So Seop Chun, likewise, politely clasped his hands together and said, We appreciate your invitation, sir, but we are in such a hurry that we ask you to convey our apologies to the person you're serving. Oh my! At Seop Chun's words, Elder Biam clicked his tongue. Then he made a troubled expression and said, This is quite a dilemma. Since you can't cross the river right away anyway, is there a need to push yourself so hard? The situation is unavoidable. Oh my! Oh dear! Then sir, we'll be on our way. Before he could finish his words, flinch. At that moment, the expressions of Seop Chun and Mong Muyak stiffened simultaneously. It was due to the intense chi emanating from Elder Biam. Although his hands were clasped behind his back, Elder Biam's chi pressed down on them as if reminiscent of a sharp sword. Pinnacle. The pinnacle stage of the transcendent realm. He had somewhat guessed, but Elder Biam was a tremendous master. Just from the true energy emanating from his chi, the gap could be clearly felt to that extent. In terms of the heaven and earth society, he was at a level comparable to an executive. Elder Biam revealed his chi in such a menacing manner and said with a smile, Listen, young masters. This old man is making this request. Please build a rapport with the young lady, even if it's just for the sake of this old man's face. Although his words were polite, it was almost half a threat. Seop Chun couldn't hold back his displeasure and said, Are you threatening us now? Ho ho. How could that be a threat? Elder Biam had no intention of actually harming them. He intended to let them know the gap appropriately and then have them attend the gathering the young lady wanted. At least to show that he had done his best to fulfill the young lady's order. You can consider it cooperation, not a threat. It's not a difficult thing, so I hope you can do it. With that, Elder Biam raised his chi even more and tried to pressure them. Right at that moment, from behind, a low voice reached Elder Biam's ear. Sir. Flinch. Instantly, Elder Biam's eyes widened. This voice belonged to the youngest young man the young lady had singled out. When? Clearly, the three of them had been standing side by side, but he had suddenly disappeared. Elder Biam couldn't help but be perplexed by this. Then a gentle voice resonated in his ear. It seems you don't know what a threat is. Shall I enlighten you?